It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we are going to talk PFL, all PFL all the time, just for this one episode. John, how the heck are you out there in the ice cold tundra?
Well, it's warmed up today, so it's not as bad today and tomorrow. So I fly back to Los Angeles on Sunday, finally, after 6 weeks here. So looking forward to that. I've only gained, probably 25 pounds in the time I've been here.
Gotta stop going to Applebee's.
Yeah, I took my mom to Applebee's today because that was her choice. She got to pick. And let me tell you, when you're mostly a vegetarian, I guess, I eat fish, a pescatarian, but I don't eat Applebee's fish. I'll tell you that. So there's very limited on the options on the menu.
Were we stuck with soup and salad today?
No, I didn't have soup and salad. I had, I was going to get the Impossible Burger, but then that just did not sound good. So I did get just a couple. I just got a bunch of vegetable sides, which actually ended up being pretty good.
I like that. There used to be a restaurant here. It was called the Black Eyed Pea, and it was a country-style restaurant, but one of their plates was a plate of all their sides, and they had all these great sides: broccoli, cheese, rice, casserole, hash brown casserole, just all sorts of really fattening Southern food. But that was the beauty part. You could actually go in there and order a plate of sides. It was actually on the menu. Great. I used to get it all the time. So I feel you on that.
I wish I had that as my option. So, but again, just a few more days, then I take my mom back with me to Los Angeles. That's the exciting stuff here. My girlfriend lives out here most of the year, so I have very little time with her because I'm watching my mom all the time. So.
Oh, well, hopefully you guys can make the most of your remaining time there. Maybe she can come out. Who knows? But we got to get this show on the road. So I've got a bunch of questions for you. The first one: how do you think Donn Davis did in the town hall that MMA Fighting had with Mike Heck hosting and Donn Davis answering all the questions?
I got to be honest, because we are kind of harsh on Donn Davis a lot of the time. We talk about how, some of the stuff he says is just terrible for MMA fans to listen to as a spokesperson. But, he's always speaking to investors. But this is the first time I thought personally, maybe I'm mistaken, maybe other people have different opinions. I thought he did a very good job of addressing MMA fans on this one. Now, not all of his answers were excellent answers. Not everything he said I thought was the best way to answer stuff, but just the way he spoke about the product and the way he spoke to the fans, and even some of the stuff which might not have been the best answer, but I thought was kind of an honest answer, like him trying to make the Nemkov fight versus Corey Anderson. There's a degree, even though he kind of threw Nemkov under the bus, which there was a degree of honesty there that I think a lot of fans would probably appreciate. And so overall, I thought, he's definitely not, he's not meant to be a guy that talks to the MMA fan base like some other people are, but I thought he did as good a job as you could expect for Donn Davis. If you grade a curve, A for him, because it was much better than all of his previous interviews I've seen with him.
Let's talk about Pitbull then. Patricio Pitbull specifically, because we all know that there are two Pitbull brothers, but we're looking
There's a lot of Pitbulls in MMA.
But only one set of brothers. And so we're talking about Patricio. Why was he asking to be released? And why did the PFL go ahead and give him that release?
The number one reason I think is he wants to go fight in the UFC. If you want to break it down to the, I can't read his mind, but you can kind of infer that he wants to fight the UFC. He wanted to get out of his Bellator contract. I had heard before that this was going to be his last contract with Bellator, that his plan was to finish up this contract that paid him a lot of money for relative to other MMA fighters, finish it up, and then go to the UFC. And so he was kind of trapped in this contract. So I think that's the primary reason. Then the secondary, why he was making a big fuss about it recently, is because he was not finishing that contract. He was not getting the fights offered to him. That since the PFL had acquired Bellator, he had not had one fight in 2024, did he? I can't recall. I think last year he had.
He had one way back in February, I believe. It was either February or March. He did get one fight.
The very beginning of the year. Yes, if I remember. But he had one fight. He still has two left. And so he is not finishing out his contract. And so that's why he was getting frustrated that it was taking this long to finish out the terms of the deal. And it was dragging on. He was getting frustrated. He made it public that he wanted to get out because he wanted to go to UFC. Now for PFL, I think most part they wanted to keep him. I mean, that's part of the reason they acquired Bellator, is get fighters like him. They wanted him around and were dragging their feet somewhat because they were trying to keep him on the roster. And in this interview, he brought up the rankings, the number of ranked fighters that they have in the PFL. So that is a major selling point. And Pitbull is a top 10 in his weight class, one of the best fighters in the world, well known on Fight Matrix, on a bunch of the rankings, on a bunch of the websites' rankings or ratings, whatever terminology you want to use. And so they wanted to retain him. And so the reason I think they released him is at this point, the vocal, one is eventually his contract was going to come to an end at some point. They'd find themselves in a legal limbo where we could be potentially challenged by Pitbull in court. They didn't want that, and the public outcry and the bad press. And the other thing is, I think also the point is because he had so few fights left because his contract was coming to an end. It's like they waited this long. It wasn't worth retaining him compared to other fighters, even though he has probably more name value. He is an older fighter towards the end of his career. And holding on to him and making a big public fuss over him was not worth it because there was not much they could have got out of it in the end result.
Do you think it was the right decision for them to let him go, considering that they are counting on all these ranked fighters to sell their product?
Well, I think it was the right decision in regard to the fact that the bad press and that there was very little, I think they would have gained from, dragging it out with him because there was very little fights left on his contract. You wouldn't have got much from him. I mean, truthfully, and the optimal result would have been that you would have used him up and used up his last few fights in big fights for PFL. And we've talked about that. It seemed like their plan after getting Bellator was not to put the Bellator fighters into a lot of fights and use up their contracts. It was to hang on to them for the rankings. But in hindsight, I think it would have been better off to put them in a couple big fights. And apparently they tried to get him an Aaron Pico fight and some other things, but they couldn't get the fights done. But to have them do other fights and potentially lose and get the rub off to another fighter, build up another fighter would have been the best results. And I think they should be kind of kicking themselves that they did not use up the full term, the full contract to get the full value of them and get that Bellator rub to PFL. In fact, they seem to have wasted this year by not having enough Bellator fighters fighting PFL to kind of get the limelight of the Bellator fighters who are generally considered better fighters, more renowned than the PFL guys. But, it's mixed things because on one hand, they released a well-known fighter. They had to kind of get rid of him because the bad press. They want to be a fighter friendly. They don't want all these headaches, and they weren't using them. But on the other hand, you've kind of opened the doors to a bunch of other fighters that might be disgruntled to start publicly complaining, thinking that'll be the way to get out. So in hindsight, they maybe should have done this behind, not let it get so public with him and worked on it behind the scenes and released him before it went public, because now my fear would be this set the example to other fighters that have, that we know that are having issues with them, but getting their fights, that they could start coming out publicly complaining, which they obviously don't want. They don't want the complaining about the promotion, because one thing is they're still looking to draw out UFC fighters to come over to Bellator or come over to PFL. And that's made harder if everybody views PFL as just a shitty version on all fronts, contracts, treatment, as the UFC.
You mentioned Aaron Pico there. What's the kerfuffle with the Aaron Pico fight that was offered, or maybe it was offered, or maybe it wasn't all the way offered? I don't know. I don't quite get that. Can you break that down for us?
Well, on the town hall, Donn Davis said that they had offered him Aaron Pico and they couldn't get the fight made, that he turned it down, or there was a little vague on that front. But then later in it, he did talk about Aaron Pico has no fights left on his contract. And that means he's potentially a free agent, and they're now in an exclusive negotiating period. Pitbull just today, I guess, put a tweet out kind of rebutting Donn Davis's comments, talking about how, that it wasn't really offered because there was no way of knowing for sure that Aaron Pico was even available to take the fight because his contract is up. So, basically attacking Donn Davis like this is misleading. I didn't turn down this fight. This deal did not even seem like a legitimate deal. And also that PFL made it known that they want to retain Pitbull so badly that they were going to use whatever contract terms they had to retain him in the PFL as long as possible. And we know, as we've gone over, contracts for promotions, that the promoters have a lot of means to drag out a contract as long as possible to make fighters suffer. And so he brought all that up. And I got to tell you, I kind of believe him on this, because just of what we've seen over the year. And also, if you're going to offer him Aaron Pico and he isn't really under a contract, his contract's up, is that a real offer? That seems like you're trying to, you're basically robbing Peter to pay Paul by you're going to offer Pitbull Aaron Pico thinking he might agree to it. And then Aaron Pico, look, we got this big fight with you, Pitbull, you better resign. Well, you're not, the agreement's not in place. You're basically, just hoping that no one catches on and they both agree. This sounds like, in some ways, like the Global Fight League's business plan, if you ask me. So, that they're, we got all these fighters, but we don't really have dates or anything lined up or broadcast partners. So again, it's not, I can understand why was upset about that. But, end result is that Aaron Pico apparently is a free agent exclusively negotiating with PFL. And the Pitbull got his full release, including the right to match. So now he's allowed to go wherever he wants.
Well, he's made it clear what he wants. He has, he's sending love notes to Volkanovski via X. And he's like, hey, Dana, I'm over here. So we know he wants to be in the UFC. Do you think the UFC wants him?
Well, I would say yes. I think the UFC will want him. The question is for how much. As I mentioned earlier, that we've known for a while, or the word was wild, that this was going to be his last Bellator contract, that he wants to go to the UFC. He feels he has to go to the UFC to get recognized by the fans, to get a legacy, because that's where all the top fighters and everybody's recognized as. And so he wasn't getting his props until he went to the UFC. And so I had heard, I don't know if this is true, that, that it was UFC or bust, which negates a lot of your leverage, because if you are willing to only sign with one promotion and you throw away all the others, then you have really not much leverage. And so I do think he'll go to the UFC. The question is, will the UFC pay him? He makes about $1 million per fight. There's a handful of fighters in Bellator that were getting $1 million contracts per fight. And then several more, another, that half a dozen, I think, got $1 million or more, close to it. And then another half a dozen to a dozen got in the, mid six figures up towards close to high six figures, close to seven figures. And he's one of the top guys. He's over $1 million per fight. Will the UFC sign him for that much? Well, they won't have to, because they have no alternative. I could see them doing that, though. I'm pretty positive they will sign him, because there's value in his name. There'll be interest in seeing him fight. But will he get the contract he got in Bellator? There's a possibility he will, because in some ways UFC would like to stick it to PFL and say, look, we took the guy in and he took no loss coming here, which will send a message to all the other fighters. Oh, it'd be a good thing to cause havoc with PFL and go to the UFC because you'd be treated right. But, this is also the UFC, which is famous for, trying to maximize their amount of money. And they might not want to anger other UFC fighters that have been around for a while. And so I could see him also lowballing them for, not lowballing compared to other UFC fighters, but lowballing him compared to what he got in Bellator. So we will see. I'm positive, though, that the UFC will make an offer to him.
You got to think that they want him for Michael Chandler at the very least, because of their history in Bellator. They need to maximize Michael Chandler, what's left of him, because we all know they will use you up all the way down to the bone marrow. So one would think that would be the carrot for the UFC, right?
That would be one, but I mean, I could also see him saying, "Hey, let's throw him in, maybe not into a title fight, even though he's exiting as the Bellator champ, because there is a lot of people at 145 that are reckoning. You know, I don't see him going immediately into a title fight because this is the same as what happened with they talked about, you know, when they were signing Eddie Alvarez. We can't give him a title shot right away. In the emails during the class action lawsuit, we got those emails from discussing we can't give a fighter, you know, a title shot right away because if he wins, it makes the Bellator promotion look better. So I see there's a couple possibilities. One is Aldo, because people have always wanted to see that fight.
Mm-hmm.
Have him go up to lightweight and fight Chandler because it's a rematch. I think that would be a second or third match after he's been in the UFC, and maybe if he fails to, you know, win a bunch of fights. But the other possibility I think strongly is put him in some sort of title eliminator. So he gets introduction at 145. He wins, they'll give him a title shot. I think that's the other possibility.
What do you think about him calling out Volkanovski? Do you think that one moves the needle, to use Dana White speak? Or do you think it has to be those other fights that are the real needle movers?
No, I mean, Volkanovski would be an interesting needle mover fight. It's not a title fight, but it's if you're not going to give Volkanovski a title match, you know, if you don't have him lined up, already agreed to, like, we're going to give you a title shot, that's a perfect fight to make because the winner, that's automatically a contender.
Okay. All right. So now that Bellator is, you know, pretty much officially shutting down, was the acquisition of it a success for PFL?
Well, in some ways, I mean, this is the big debate, I guess. Was it a success or not? In some ways, I mean, my understanding was they didn't put out any real capital. They gave equity in the promotion. And so, you know, it didn't really cost PFL anything up front. It's eventually could pay off for the Bellator Viacom that they get a lot of valuable shares in PFL in the future if PFL is successful. But if PFL fails, then they get to write it off as a big loss. So either way, Viacom wins under that formula. But for PFL, what they acquired was a bunch of ranked fighters, which they can sell, which they have. They acquired a bunch of TV contracts that they got for the year that made their bottom line look better. Basically, they kept the Bellator contracts. They could, you know, show them that look at the increased revenue we got, even though it was going to disappear after the Bellator contract was up. So in that sense, it's successful. But the failure part is you had, you know, the lost momentum. You introduced a lot of well-known fighters into PFL. And we got no sense of a merger. They didn't build off the excitement of having these two universes, kind of like pro wrestling is MMA uses the pro wrestling model, two companies coming together and getting their fighters to meet. We had the Bellator versus PFL event, but Bellator basically beat the shit out of PFL in that, and nothing really became of it after that. So we didn't get to build off that with PFL. So I would say it's a mixed bag. One, on the financialization, that PFL is very good. It will probably be considered a success because they were able to add this promotion. They took someone off the table, another competitor, made themselves the number 2 promotion by far, could point to all the ranked fighters, could point to their TV deals and expanded universe of access, could do all that when they were selling them. But I didn't see any real momentum gain from acquiring Bellator, and that's where I think it was a failure.
What about the new format? Because they've announced a new format as well. I'm going to let you explain the new format because it's wildly different from what they used to do, but it's not exactly cutting edge, is it?
No, it's they acquired Bellator, they killed Bellator, and then they just resurrected Bellator's tournament model under Bjorn Rebney. So all it is they're getting rid of the season format, the big selling point that was going to take them to, you know, make them the next big thing that they were hyping for years. What made them different, which was going to be so fascinating for fans, was going to draw people in. The season format, and they dropped it completely, and they're now going to 8-man tournaments in 8 weight classes. Yeah, I think 8 weight classes are going to do it in.
Yes.
So it's going to be very condensed from April to like September, right? So like 6 weeks between each final department is going to be just 6 weeks. It's going to be over really rapidly. So older fighters probably are not going to like that because, you know, older fighters get beat up a lot easier, so they don't recover as fast. But that's the new format. It's basically the Bellator format, which Bellator dropped in 2014. We're going back to that. Now, I complain and laugh at it that we've tried this and failed, but I do think it's an improvement because the season format definitely was not working. And I think the 8-man format is, as much as it's still a retread of Bellator, it's easier to follow. It's less fights, so the fighters can make it through the season more. It's better at every, it's better in every regard there. My idea, and I think we talked about this a while ago, would have been have the season 1 year fighters fight, they gain points. And then the next year, the 8 best fighters are in a tournament and you alternate weight classes. So you don't have nearly as many weight classes in tournaments going. So it's easier to follow, think about that in the future, PFL. But for now, it's 8-man tourneys, and it's, what's old is new.
You said think about that in the future. What's PFL's future look like?
Well,
I'll save that for the end. But
okay.
For right now, I need to know about the pay, because with this new format, it's got to affect the pay, right? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!